nightfall in Phoenix offers no relief. When the sun slips behind the jagged desert mountains, the city does not cool, it exhales, slowly releasing the heat it has absorbed throughout the day. That heat clings stubbornly to the asphalt, the concrete walls, the metal benches, and even the air itself, turning the streets into slow-burning surfaces that refuse to rest. Streetlights flicker to life, casting long, trembling shadows across sidewalks where sleep is no longer a basic human right, but a dangerous gamble taken only out of sheer exhaustion. For thousands of people experiencing homelessness, night does not signal comfort or recovery. It marks the beginning of another struggle to endure until morning. Every sound sharpens the senses. Every unfamiliar footstep tightens the chest. Sleep, if it comes at all, is fragile and incomplete. People clutch worn backpacks that contain everything they own, documents that prove who they are, clothing for changing weather, small personal items, and the last traces of hope they have not yet been forced to surrender. One eye closes while the other remains open, trained on the darkness. Vulnerability is constant, and safety exists only in brief, uncertain moments that can vanish without warning. From this darkness, voices begin to rise, tired, cracked, and unmistakably real. They speak of exhaustion that never fully fades, of thirst that lingers even after drinking, of fear that settles into the body, and of the slow, quiet ache of being forgotten by the world around them. These voices do not exaggerate. They do not perform for sympathy. They simply tell the truth as it is lived. This is the raw foundation of any true documentary about the homeless. The understanding that what unfolds before us is not symbolism or distant tragedy, but real human lives, unfolding in real time beneath the glow of streetlights that never sleep. The reality of survival. Life without a safety net. Being homeless is not merely the absence of shelter. It is the experience of living in a permanent state of alertness where the mind is never allowed to fully rest. Every moment requires awareness. Trust becomes fragile and easily fractured, not because people lack humanity, but because resources are scarce and uncertainty governs every interaction. Even among those who share the same hardship, tension quietly simmers beneath the surface. Everyone is tired. Everyone is calculating risk. Everyone is focused on surviving one more day in an environment where a single mistake, a lost bag, a missed opportunity, a moment of distraction can mean losing what little stability remains. Sleep comes only when and where it is possible. On cold park benches, beneath rumbling overpasses, beside abandoned buildings, or directly on sidewalks where the ground still radiates heat long after the sun has set. Bodies gradually learn to tolerate discomfort, but they never learn to relax into safety. Rest is shallow and broken, interrupted by footsteps passing too close, sudden noises, flashing lights, or the constant fear of being forced to move along. In this world, sleep is not restorative. It is borrowed, temporary, and always conditional, taken in fragments rather than whole nights. Searching through trash for food becomes routine. It is no longer dramatic, no longer shocking. It is necessary. Meals are assembled from discarded leftovers, half-full bottles, and whatever can be found before it spoils under the unforgiving desert sun. Hunger lowers expectations but does not erase self-respect. Dignity does not disappear. It is stretched thin, tested day after day by choices no one should ever have to make simply to stay alive. This is the quiet truth that any honest documentary about the homeless must confront. Homelessness is not the result of laziness or moral failure. It is the collapse of stability, the moment when a life unravels faster than the system can respond, leaving people to survive without a safety net beneath them. A human tragedy when fragility is impossible to ignore. Some images refuse to disappear the moment you look away. They follow you quietly, resurfacing in silence, returning when the noise fades, demanding to be remembered. Among them is the image of a pregnant woman sitting on flattened cardboard at the edge of a sidewalk, her body heavy with new life, while her future remains terrifyingly uncertain. Her posture is careful, deliberate, as if even the act of sitting must be negotiated with pain and exhaustion. There is no clinic waiting for her, no stable shelter offering warmth or privacy, no guarantee that her child will enter the world safely, surrounded by care instead of concrete. As the desert sun sinks below the horizon, winter nights in Phoenix grow unexpectedly cold. The temperature drops fast, and the thin layers she wraps around herself, old blankets, worn clothing, scraps of fabric, offer little protection against the wind that cuts through the streets. Fear settles in with the darkness, heavier than the cold itself. Fear of getting sick, fear of being forced to move, fear of what might happen if labor begins in the middle of the night with no one to call and nowhere to go. She rests her hand gently on her stomach, her fingers moving slowly, instinctively, tracing the shape of the life growing inside her. She whispers softly, words meant only for her unborn child. Perhaps she is offering reassurance. Perhaps she is clinging to hope. Perhaps she is praying for a future she can barely imagine. In that quiet moment, homelessness stops being an abstract issue or a distant statistic used in reports and headlines. It becomes painfully, unmistakably human. It becomes a mother and a child, exposed to the elements, balanced between survival and uncertainty. Looking at her, it becomes impossible to turn away without confronting an uncomfortable truth. This is not a rare exception. This is not an accident. This is what happens when systems fail slowly, when safety nets tear silently, and when vulnerability is allowed to exist in plain sight without intervention. The cruelty revealed here is not found in individual behavior, but in the structures that permit such fragility to persist unchecked. This is not sensationalism. It is not exaggeration crafted for emotional effect. It is reality as it exists, unfiltered and unresolved. And it forms the emotional core of Homeless in America TV and every meaningful documentary about the homeless. A reminder that behind every image, every statistic, and every passing glance, there is a life that should never have been left this exposed. The scale of the crisis, when numbers represent lives. More than 9,700 people are currently experiencing homelessness across Phoenix. On paper, the figure appears neat and controlled, a statistic that fits cleanly into reports, charts, and budget discussions. It is easy to glance at it, acknowledge it, and move on. But behind that number are human beings. Each digit represents a person with a name, a past, relationships, memories, and plans that once pointed toward a future. These are not anonymous figures on a spreadsheet. They are lives interrupted mid-journey, pushed off course, and too often forgotten once they fall out of view. Phoenix was once promoted as a land of opportunity, a sun-soaked haven where determination still mattered. For decades, people arrived believing in a simple equation: work hard, save steadily, buy a home, raise a family, and retire with dignity. Construction workers, service employees, retirees, and young families came chasing warmth, affordability, and the promise of stability. That belief shaped the city's identity and drew generations who trusted that effort would be rewarded. Today, for many who live here, that promise no longer holds. Rapid population growth has collided head-on with soaring rents, stagnant wages, and social safety nets stretched thin long before the crisis reached this scale. Housing costs have climbed faster than incomes, while entry-level and essential jobs have failed to keep pace with the true cost of survival. The margin for error has vanished. A missed paycheck, a medical bill, a rent increase, or a family emergency is often all it takes to push someone from housing into uncertainty. This widening gap did not appear overnight. It grew quietly, year by year, until it became impossible to ignore. Now, the consequences are written across the city itself. They appear beneath highway overpasses, where tents line the concrete. They stretch along sidewalks where people sleep beside shopping carts filled with what remains of their lives. They surface in encampments that rise, disappear, and reappear elsewhere as instability becomes a permanent condition rather than a temporary setback. The crisis is no longer hidden on the margins. It is visible on nearly every major street. Statistics may seem neutral, even distant, but what they describe is deeply personal. They tell the story of thousands of lives suspended in uncertainty, caught between what once felt possible and what may never come. Lives paused, without a clear path forward, waiting not just for housing, but for recognition, stability, and the chance to begin again, where the crisis becomes visible. At the heart of Phoenix lies a place known simply as the Zone. It is not marked on tourist maps, nor defined by official signs or borders. Yet, it has become impossible to ignore for anyone willing to look directly at the city's reality. Spanning more than 20 acres, the zone has grown into one of the largest unsheltered encampments in the region, a sprawling, shifting landscape shaped not by planning, but by desperation. Each night, nearly 1,000 people gather here, not because they choose to live this way, but because every other option has slowly disappeared. They arrive carrying what little they own, drawn by the same unspoken truth: there is nowhere else left to go. The landscape is filled with shelters built purely for survival. Tents are stitched together from torn tarps, plastic sheets, cardboard, and scraps of fabric scavenged from construction sites, dumpsters, or abandoned lots. Nothing matches, nothing lasts, and everything is temporary. Dust hangs thick in the air, settling into clothing, bedding, and lungs. Coating lives in a fine layer of grit that never fully washes away. The smell is constant and inescapable, a mix of heat, waste, sweat, and melted plastic, intensified by the desert sun and the absence of basic sanitation. During the day, the sun shows no mercy. It beats down relentlessly, turning the ground into a furnace and making shade a form of currency. Water becomes precious. Heat exhaustion and dehydration are constant threats. At night, the temperature drops sharply, and the same thin shelters that trapped heat hours earlier now offer little protection from the cold. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by noise, fear, and the awareness that safety here is fragile and temporary. This is where dreams brought from other states, other decades, and other lives slowly dissolve beneath the desert sky. Many arrived in Phoenix believing in a future that once seemed attainable: steady work, affordable housing, a fresh start. Over time, those hopes are worn down by exhaustion, instability, and the slow erosion of time spent merely surviving. In this space, Phoenix becomes more than a city. It becomes a symbol, not of opportunity, but of fracture, of promises that fail to hold. The zone stands as a central image in this unfolding documentary about the homeless, a place where the crisis is no longer hidden behind statistics or policy debates, but fully exposed in plain sight, forcing anyone who sees it to confront the reality of what has been allowed to exist. Two parallel worlds, separated by less than a mile. Less than 1 mile separates the zone from downtown Phoenix, yet the distance might as well be immeasurable. In one direction, glass towers rise confidently into the sky. Air-conditioned offices remain lit late into the night, while cafes, gyms, luxury apartments, and modern transit systems hum with comfort and routine. Just minutes away, tents line sidewalks, bodies rest on concrete, and survival replaces ambition as the primary concern. These two worlds occupy the same physical space, but they rarely acknowledge one another. They exist side by side, divided not by geography, but by circumstance and perception. For those living without shelter, invisibility becomes a daily reality, not because they are hidden, but because society has learned to look past them. Eyes avert, steps quicken, avoidance quietly replaces engagement, and silence takes the place of responsibility. A moral question lingers in the space between these worlds, heavy and unresolved. If we choose not to see people suffering right beside us, what does that reveal about who we have become and what we are willing to accept as normal? A rapidly escalating emergency. The homelessness crisis in Phoenix is no longer advancing at a slow, manageable pace. It is accelerating with alarming speed. In a single year, the unhoused population surged by 28%, a sharp increase that pushed the city into a full-scale crisis by 2025. This rapid rise has overwhelmed systems that were already stretched thin, exposing the limits of existing responses and leaving thousands of people without meaningful support or a clear path out of instability. What was once described as a growing concern has now become an emergency unfolding in real time. More than 53% of unhoused individuals in Phoenix are now living entirely outdoors. There is no electricity to provide light after dark or relief from extreme heat. There is no running water for drinking, bathing, or basic hygiene. There are no walls to block the desert sun, no insulation against cold nights, and no shelter when sudden storms roll through. Survival depends almost entirely on physical endurance and luck, turning every shift in weather into a direct and sometimes life-threatening risk. In this environment, health deteriorates quickly, and small problems escalate into medical emergencies with devastating speed. Each year, nearly $900 million is spent on homelessness-related efforts across the city. On the surface, the figure suggests commitment and action. In practice, however, much of this funding is absorbed by short-term reactive measures, encampment removals, brief shelter placements, emergency medical responses, and enforcement-based strategies aimed at controlling where people exist rather than addressing why they are there. Tents are cleared, belongings are lost, and people are forced to move, only to reappear elsewhere days or weeks later. The problem is not solved, it is simply relocated. Displacement is repeatedly mistaken for resolution. Suffering is pushed from one block to another, from one neighborhood to the next, while the underlying causes remain untouched. Stability is never created, trust is eroded, and the cycle quietly resets itself over and over again. This is not merely a failure of funding, it is a failure of long-term vision, coordination, and moral commitment, a refusal to prioritize permanent solutions over temporary control. It is a reality that any responsible documentary about the homeless cannot afford to ignore, because it reveals not just a crisis of housing, but a crisis of choice, the collapse of the American dream. There was a time when Phoenix stood as a symbol of opportunity. It embodied a simple promise: work hard, buy a home, raise a family, and retire with dignity. For generations, people believed that persistence and effort would be enough to secure a stable future in this sun-soaked city. That belief drew workers, families, and retirees alike, all chasing the same vision of security and belonging. Today, that promise feels increasingly out of reach. Average rent has climbed beyond $1,800 per month, while wages have failed to keep pace with the rising cost of living. For many households, stability now hangs by a thread. A single emergency, a job loss, an unexpected illness, or a family crisis can unravel years of hard work in a matter of weeks, pushing people from housing into uncertainty with alarming speed. An estimated 4,500 people over the age of 55 are now living outdoors in Phoenix. Many of them spent decades working, paying taxes, contributing to their communities, and trusting in a system they believed would be there when they needed it most. Instead, they find themselves sleeping on sidewalks, carrying their past in memories rather than insecurity. The American dream did not disappear overnight. It did not collapse in a single moment. It simply slipped out of reach, quietly, gradually, leaving thousands behind in its shadow. A community under strain. The impact of the homelessness crisis extends far beyond those living on the streets. Local businesses struggle as security and sanitation costs rise, foot traffic declines, and uncertainty takes hold. Store owners worry about safety, customers stay away, and entire blocks begin to feel tense and unstable. Fear spreads quietly, fueled by frustration and a sense that the situation is spiraling beyond control. Residents find themselves emotionally torn. Many feel deep empathy for people experiencing homelessness, recognizing the humanity behind each face, yet they are also exhausted by the lack of lasting solutions. Compassion collides with frustration as encampments grow and conditions worsen. While many oppose the removal of camps without alternatives, they are equally disheartened by the absence of humane, long-term options that offer real stability instead of constant displacement. And yet, even under strain, light remains. Volunteers step forward to distribute water in the heat. Neighbors gather on weekends to clean streets and restore a sense of shared space. Ordinary people, without titles, budgets, or authority, continue to show up for one another. Their actions serve as a quiet reminder that while systems may falter, human solidarity has not disappeared. A future, a call to conscience. Phoenix now stands at a crossroads, facing a choice that will define not only its policies, but its moral direction. The path forward cannot be determined by budgets alone, nor by temporary fixes designed to ease discomfort without addressing root causes. The future of this city depends on values, on what it chooses to see, what it chooses to hear, and what it chooses to do in response. To see means acknowledging the humanity of those living on the streets, not as obstacles or statistics, but as neighbors. To listen means hearing their stories without judgment, recognizing pain without turning away. To act means moving beyond sympathy toward meaningful, sustained solutions that restore dignity and stability. It means reconnecting families who have been separated by hardship. It means speaking out when silence feels easier. It means refusing indifference, even when the problem feels overwhelming or inconvenient. Because lasting change does not begin with government mandates or policy documents. It begins with people, ordinary individuals choosing compassion over avoidance, responsibility over denial. And that is the final message this documentary about the homeless leaves behind. The future is still being written, and who we become depends on what we choose to do now.